Welcome back. Tonight, we're drifting into the quiet corners of Five Nights at Freddy's, where shadows grow long and memories fade into the background hum of old machinery. The franchise that began with a simple night guard job in a haunted pizzeria has grown into something vast and intricate, a universe populated by dozens upon dozens of characters, each with their own stories, their own tragedies, their own place in the grand design. But in any story that sprawls across this many games, this many books, this many timelines and retcons and revelations, some characters inevitably slip through the cracks. They appear for a moment, serve their purpose, and then fade back into the darkness, remembered by only the most dedicated lore hunters who pore over every detail, every Easter egg, every fleeting glimpse of something that might have been important once. These are the forgotten characters of Five Nights at Freddy's. Not the main players like William Afton or the puppet. Not the iconic animatronics like Freddy and Bonnie that graced the first game and became instant horror legends. No, these are the ones who appeared in a single game, or a single scene, or sometimes just in the game files themselves, never quite making it to the spotlight. Some of them had interesting mechanics that made nights challenging in their own unique ways. Others contributed small pieces to the lore, breadcrumbs that might lead somewhere if you follow them long enough. And some just existed for a moment before the franchise moved on, leaving them behind like props in a storage room, gathering dust while newer, shinier animatronics took center stage. What makes a character forgotten? It's not always about being unimportant. Sometimes it's about timing. A character introduced in the middle of a game's run, overshadowed by bigger revelations happening around them. Sometimes it's about subtlety. A character so easy to miss that most players never encountered them. Their existence confirmed only by data miners and Easter egg hunters. And sometimes it's simply about the relentless pace of the franchise itself. When new games arrive with new casts of animatronics, new mysteries to solve, new horrors to face, it's easy for the characters from earlier installments to fade into the background, their stories complete or abandoned, their roles in the narrative fulfilled or forgotten. But tonight, we're bringing them back into the light. We're examining these overlooked figures, these minor players in the grand horror show that is Five Nights at Freddy's. From human characters whose names we barely remember to animatronics that appeared once and never again. From shadow entities whose very existence raises more questions than answers to entire bands of performers who never quite caught on with the fan base. We'll explore why they were created, what purpose they served, and why, ultimately, they've been left behind as the franchise continues to evolve and expand. The thing about forgotten characters is that they often tell us something interesting about the franchise itself. They're like archaeological layers in the earth, markers of different eras in FNAF's development. A character from the early games might reveal Scott Cawthon's original creative direction before the lore spiraled into the complex mythology it became. An unused animatronic design might show us what could have been, a path not taken that might have led the franchise in an entirely different direction. Even the characters who were meant to be throwaway jokes or simple Easter eggs can take on new meaning when examined through the lens of everything that came after. There's something melancholy about these forgotten figures. In a series defined by tragedy, by children trapped in metal shells, and families torn apart by unspeakable horror, there's a strange parallel in characters themselves being lost to time. Not dead, not destroyed, just forgotten. Relegated to wikis and old forum discussions, remembered by a shrinking group of longtime fans while newcomers to the franchise focus on the main storyline, the current games, the latest revelations. These characters exist in a kind of limbo, neither fully part of the active lore nor completely erased from it. They're ghosts in their own right, haunting the periphery of the FNAF universe. As we explore each of these forgotten figures tonight, you might find yourself remembering some of them. Maybe you encountered them during your own playthroughs. Maybe you saw them mentioned in a theory video years ago. Maybe you've never heard of some of them at all. That's the nature of a franchise this sprawling. No single person can keep track of every character, every detail, every thread in this tangled web. But that's also what makes this exploration worthwhile. In shining a light on these overlooked elements of FNAF, we might discover connections we missed, appreciate subtle details that went unnoticed, or simply remember why we fell in love with this franchise in the first place. The forgotten characters of Five Nights at Freddy's deserve their moment in the spotlight, even if it's just for one night, even if it's just in this quiet space where we let the story wash over us like a gentle fog. They were part of this journey, even if their roles were small. They contributed to the atmosphere, the challenge, the mystery that makes FNAF what it is. And in remembering them, we're completing the picture, filling in the gaps, acknowledging that every piece matters, no matter how small or how easily overlooked. So settle in as we begin our tour through the forgotten corners of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza and beyond. We'll move slowly through these memories, examining each character with the care they deserve, unpacking their significance and their absence. Whether you're hearing about some of these figures for the first time or rediscovering old favorites you'd nearly forgotten yourself, this journey through the overlooked elements of FNAF promises to reveal just how deep and intricate this franchise truly is. Every shadow has a story. Every forgotten face once meant something to someone. And tonight, we're going to remember them all. Let's begin with a character who, despite having a significant role in one of the franchise's most important games, has been almost entirely overshadowed by the events and revelations that surrounded him. In the cold light of the security office at Fazbear's Fright, with the smell of old animatronic parts and cheap horror attraction props hanging in the air, a voice crackles through the phone. But this isn't Phone Guy, that familiar nervous guide who talked players through the first 3 games before meeting his untimely end on night 4 of the original FNAF. No, this is someone new, someone different. His voice is younger, more casual, tinged with an almost surfer-like drawl that immediately sets him apart from his predecessor. Hey man, okay, I have some awesome news for you. He's enthusiastic, excited even, about this weird job at a horror attraction built from the remains of a company haunted by child murders and possessed animatronics. This is Phone Dude, and if you're struggling to remember him, you're not alone. Phone Dude appears exclusively in Five Nights at Freddy's 3, that pivotal game that takes place 30 years after the original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza closed its doors, in a horror attraction called Fazbear's Fright that's been built to capitalize on the dark legends surrounding the franchise. He serves the same basic function as Phone Guy before him, calling at the start of nights to explain mechanics, provide tips, and offer context for what's happening in the building. But where Phone Guy was clearly anxious, aware that something was deeply wrong with those animatronics, even if he couldn't quite articulate it, Phone Dude is completely oblivious to the danger. He treats this whole thing like an exciting adventure, a cool job at a fun horror attraction, never quite grasping that the real horror isn't the manufactured kind. The contrast is deliberate and striking. Phone Guy knew too much, had worked at these places long enough to understand that the animatronics were dangerous, that the history was dark, that people died in these establishments. His calls became progressively more worried as the games went on, culminating in his death mid-call in FNAF 1, Golden Freddy's haunting poster appearing in the background as we hear him being attacked. Phone Dude, on the other hand, is a newcomer to this world. He's excited about finding vintage audio training cassettes and thinks playing them over speakers will make the attraction feel more authentic. He's thrilled when they discover a real one, meaning Springtrap, the decayed Spring Bonnie suit containing William Afton's corpse, without any understanding of what that discovery actually means. Dude, these are like prehistoric, he says, about the training tapes, and you can hear the genuine excitement in his voice. He's treating this like a treasure hunt, like finding old relics from a defunct pizzeria chain is the coolest thing that's ever happened to him. When he mentions finding a real animatronic, his voice speeds up. He's practically giddy about it. And then he has to go, rushing off before he can provide more details. That's Phone Dude in a nutshell. Enthusiastic, distracted, perpetually about to run off to handle something else in the attraction. Never present long enough to realize the true horror of what he's dealing with. The name Phone Dude itself is interesting. Unlike Phone Guy, whose name is simply descriptive, Phone Dude carries connotations. It's a fan-created name, coined by the community to distinguish him from his predecessor, but it's stuck because it fits his personality perfectly. Dude suggests casualness, a laid-back attitude, someone who probably uses bro unironically and thinks everything is either awesome or totally rad. In the context of FNAF, where everything is steeped in tragedy and horror, Phone Dude's cheerful obliviousness is almost jarring. He's the wrong person for this job, not because he's incompetent, but because he fundamentally doesn't understand what he's gotten himself into. Phone Dude only calls on nights 1 and 2. After that, he stops appearing, presumably because he's out tracking down a new lead or dealing with other aspects of getting the attraction ready to open. In his place, he plays those vintage training tapes he was so excited about. Tapes featuring Phone Guy from decades earlier, explaining Springlock suit procedures in that same nervous voice we remember from the earlier games. The switch is jarring. One moment you have Phone Dude's casual enthusiasm. The next you have Phone Guy's careful, worried instructions about how to avoid getting crushed to death by Springlock mechanisms. It's a transition from someone who doesn't understand the danger to someone who understands it all too well. This absence after night 2 has led to some fan speculation. What happened to Phone Dude? Did he discover something about Springtrap that made him stop showing up? Did something happen to him off screen? The game never addresses it. He simply stops calling, and we're left with pre-recorded tapes instead. It's possible he's just busy with other duties. After all, the attraction is set to open in a week, and there's probably a lot to do. But in FNAF, where every detail can be significant, where every absence can mean something sinister, Phone Dude's disappearance from the narrative feels deliberate. He served his purpose, introducing the setting and finding Springtrap, and then the game moved on without him. The character is voiced by Scott Cawthon himself, just like Phone Guy, but the voice work is distinctly different. Where Phone Guy sounded like a middle-aged man, trying to be reassuring while dealing with his own anxiety, Phone Dude sounds young, maybe early 20s, someone doing what they probably think is a cool job without really thinking through the implications. The Surfer Dude accent is pronounced, but not quite stereotypical. It's enough to establish his personality. to make him feel distinct from Phone Guy without turning him into a complete caricature. It's good voice work, creating a memorable character with just a few lines spread across 2 nights. What makes Phone Dude forgotten isn't that he was unimportant. His role in FNAF 3 is actually quite significant. He's the one who found Springtrap sealed in that hidden room, who brought William Afton's undead form back into the world. He's the one who sets the stage for everything that happens in the game, who explains the attraction's layout and systems, who provides the context we need to understand why we're there and what we're dealing with. Without Phone Dude, FNAF 3's setup doesn't work as well. We need that enthusiastic, oblivious voice to contrast with the horror of what we're actually facing. But he's forgotten because he's so thoroughly overshadowed. FNAF 3 is remembered for Springtrap, for the revelation of William Afton's fate, for the mini-games that revealed so much crucial lore, for the good ending that showed the children's spirits finally being freed. Phone Dude is a footnote in all of that, a vehicle for exposition that did its job and then faded into the background. He doesn't appear in later games. He's not referenced in the books. He exists solely in those first 2 nights of FNAF 3, and once you've heard his calls a few times, they become something you skip through to get to the gameplay. There's also the carbon monoxide theory, an interesting bit of fan speculation that emerged from Phone Dude's own dialogue. He tells you to keep the air flowing in the attraction, warning that if you don't, then you'll start seeing some crazy stuff. Within the game's mechanics, this explains why the ventilation system is important and why the phantom animatronics appear when it fails. However, some fans have theorized that the crazy stuff could refer to actual carbon monoxide poisoning, with the hallucinations being medical symptoms rather than supernatural phenomena. While this interpretation adds a layer of real-world danger to the horror attraction's already questionable safety standards, it's worth noting this remains fan theory rather than confirmed lore. Phone Dude's casual mention of it, treating potential CO exposure like just another quirk of the building rather than a serious safety hazard, would certainly fit with his character's general obliviousness to danger. In the broader context of FNAF's human characters, Phone Dude represents a specific type, the outsider who doesn't understand what they're dealing with. He's not connected to the original tragedies. He wasn't there when children disappeared, when the bite of 87 happened, when Freddy Fazbear's Pizza closed its doors for the final time. He's a new generation, someone who knows the legends but treats them as just that, legends, stories to be exploited for entertainment value rather than warnings to be heeded. In that sense, he's a cautionary figure, showing what happens when you treat tragedy as a commodity, when you dig up the past without understanding its weight. The fact that Fazbear's Fright burns down at the end of the game, with Springtrap escaping but presumably Phone Dude and any other staff surviving, feels like cosmic justice. The attraction that tried to profit from horror ends up consumed by real fire, the past literally burning down the present's attempt to exploit it. We never find out what happens to Phone Dude after this. Presumably, he survives, realizes that maybe this job wasn't as awesome as he thought, and moves on with his life. But in terms of the FNAF narrative, he just vanishes, his story incomplete, his fate unimportant to the larger mythology. Phone Dude deserves more recognition than he gets. He's a well-designed character who serves his narrative purpose effectively, providing a fresh voice for a new era of the franchise while still connecting to the past through those training tapes. His enthusiasm makes the horror of Springtrap more potent through contrast. His obliviousness makes us, the player, feel more isolated, knowing that the person on the phone can't help us because he doesn't truly understand what we're facing. He's a good character in his limited role, but he's forgotten because FNAF 3 had so much else going on, so many more memorable elements that pushed him to the sidelines. If you ever replay FNAF 3, listen to Phone Dude's calls with fresh ears. Appreciate the character work, the way his personality comes through in just a few lines. Notice how different he is from Phone Guy, how that difference tells us something about how time has passed, how the original horrors have become distant enough that someone can approach them with curiosity rather than fear. Phone Dude might not be important to the lore, might not have a role in solving the mysteries of FNAF, but he's part of the atmosphere, part of what makes FNAF 3 feel distinct from the games before and after it. And that's worth remembering. In the flickering glow of malfunctioning cameras, in the brief moment between putting down the monitor and seeing a door light still functional, they appear. Two dark figures, shadows of animatronics that shouldn't be there, can't be there, existing in that space between hallucination and something more sinister. They don't attack like the others. They don't follow the same rules. They simply appear, stare with white pupils glowing in pitch black faces, and then vanish, leaving you to wonder what you actually saw. These are the shadow animatronics, and their very existence is one of FNAF's most enduring mysteries. Shadow Bonnie, known by the deeply unpronounceable designation RWQFSFAASXC from the game files, and Shadow Freddy, his equally mysterious counterpart, first appeared in Five Nights at Freddy's 2. Unlike the animatronics that actively hunt you through those claustrophobic nights, the shadows are rare, almost mythically so. Shadow Bonnie's appearance probability is extremely low, with the game's code resulting in roughly a 1 in 16,000 chance of encountering him, making him one of the rarest sights in the entire franchise. Many players complete the game multiple times without ever seeing him. When he does appear, he manifests in the left corner of the office, a pitch-black silhouette of Toy Bonnie with glowing white eyes and teeth, watching you in complete silence. If you stare at him for too long, the game crashes on PC or freezes on mobile. He's not a threat in the traditional sense. He's something else entirely. The name RWQFSSFASXC itself has become something of a legend in the FNAF community. Found in the game's files, it appears to be a completely random string of letters with no clear meaning, no obvious pronunciation. Players have attempted various interpretations, Rick Woofis Faz Kiss being one popular attempt, but none feel quite right. In FNAF World, Scott Cawthon poked fun at this with Shadow Bonnie's loading screen text reading, "Say my name," as if daring players to figure out how to pronounce it. The community eventually adopted simpler alternatives, Shadow Bonnie or just RXQ, because referring to a character by a 10-letter consonant cluster is impractical for casual discussion. But the name's opacity feels appropriate. These are entities that resist easy categorization, that don't fit neatly into a FNAF's established rules for how animatronics work and what makes them dangerous. They're not possessed by murdered children. They're not security systems malfunctioning. They don't seem to be hallucinations exactly, though their appearances are fleeting enough to make you question what you saw. According to later lore developments, particularly in FNAF AR, Special Delivery, the shadow animatronics are formed from agony, that specific supernatural substance in FNAF's mythology that's essentially congealed negative emotions and suffering given form. They're the opposite of Remnant, which contains life and consciousness. Dark Remnant creates beings without souls, entities that exist because of pain, but aren't themselves the spirits of specific people. This origin makes the shadows unique in FNAF's bestiary. Most threats are either possessed animatronics containing the spirits of murder victims, or security protocols gone wrong. The shadows are neither. They're manifestations of the collective trauma that permeates these locations, the accumulated suffering of every tragedy that happened within these walls given shape and some degree of sentience. They're not hostile exactly. They don't hunt you with the same relentless purpose as the other animatronics, but they're not benign either. Their presence causes system failures, their appearances herald disaster, and their very existence suggests something fundamentally wrong with the fabric of reality in these cursed buildings. Shadow Freddy is slightly more common than Shadow Bonnie, appearing in the parts and service room in FNAF 2, with somewhat better odds than his rabbit counterpart's nearly impossible probability. He looks like a dark purple version of Golden Freddy, that fan-favorite mystery animatronic from the first game, sitting slumped in the corner when the lights go out. Like Shadow Bonnie, he doesn't directly attack. He just sits there, a dark presence in the corner of your vision, gone when you look back. His appearance in FNAF 2 is mysterious enough, but his role in FNAF 3 becomes more significant and more troubling. In the FNAF 3 minigames, Shadow Freddy appears to lure the original animatronics into the safe room where William Afton is waiting to dismantle them. Using what Henry Emily would later describe as familiar tricks in his final speech, this dark figure leads Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy one by one toward their destruction. This action directly enables Afton's plan to harvest Remnant from the haunted robots, to extract the supernatural essence binding souls to metal in his quest for immortality. Whether Shadow Freddy acts under Afton's control, is manipulated by the killer, or operates independently with motivations that coincidentally align with Afton's goals, remains unclear. The game shows us what happens, but never explains why Shadow Freddy takes these actions. This ambiguity raises uncomfortable questions about Shadow Freddy's nature and purpose. As a being of agony rather than a ghost with human emotions and memories, Shadow Freddy might lack the moral compass that would prevent him from enabling more suffering. His existence stems from accumulated pain, and perhaps causing or facilitating more pain is simply part of his nature. Alternatively, he might be acting under duress or manipulation, a tool used by Afton without genuine agency. The franchise doesn't provide definitive answers, leaving Shadow Freddy's motivations as mysterious as his origins. The relationship between the two shadow animatronics is also unclear. They appear separately in FNAF 2, each in their own location, each following their own rules. Shadow Bonnie crashes your game if observed too long. Shadow Freddy just sits there watching. They don't interact with each other in any game where they both appear. They seem to be separate entities that happen to share similar properties, both dark silhouettes of existing animatronics, both appearing rarely, both existing outside the normal rules that govern the rest of the characters. But whether they're connected beyond these surface similarities, whether they're aware of each other or working toward common goals, remains mysterious. In FNAF 3, Shadow Bonnie returns not as a random encounter, but as part of the secret minigame sequence required to achieve the good ending. The player must navigate a series of hidden minigames, each featuring a different animatronic, to reach a special happiest day scenario where all the murdered children's spirits can finally rest. Shadow Bonnie's minigame involves navigating through glitched, broken spaces, moving between different games code until you reach a crying child and give them a cake. This suggests that Shadow Bonnie, despite his unsettling presence, might actually be helping the spirits move on, facilitating their release rather than tormenting them. This benevolent role contradicts Shadow Freddy's actions in the same game, where he lures animatronics into danger. It suggests that the shadow animatronics aren't uniformly malevolent, that they might have different purposes or different relationships with the spirits they encounter. Or perhaps their actions reflect the different types of agony they're formed from. Shadow Freddy, darker and more active, might embody the pain of betrayal and dismantlement. Shadow Bonnie, more passive and mysterious, might represent something else. Perhaps the sorrow of children unable to move on, their grief given form. The fact that both shadows take the forms of specific animatronics is significant. Shadow Bonnie resembles Toy Bonnie, but could also be seen as a shadow of Spring Bonnie, William Afton's preferred disguise when luring victims. Shadow Freddy looks like Golden Freddy, himself a mysterious entity tied to the fifth murdered child. The shadows aren't just random dark shapes. They're specifically echoes of important figures in FNAF's mythology, suggesting some deeper connection between the characters they mimic and the agony they embody. In Ultimate Custom Night, both shadow animatronics can be summoned by the character DD, or her darker variant XOR. Shadow Bonnie's appearance blacks out the office for 10 seconds, making it nearly impossible to track threats. Shadow Freddy has a similar mechanic in other appearances, disrupting the player's ability to monitor and respond to animatronics. Even in UCN, a game often interpreted as William Afton's personal hell, the shadows exist to create chaos, to make an already difficult situation more chaotic and unpredictable. FNAF AR. Special Delivery expanded on their lore by explicitly connecting them to Dark Remnant, that substance formed from suffering and negative emotions. In the game, Shadow Bonnie appears when you collect too much Dark Remnant, attracted to or perhaps manifesting from the concentration of distilled agony. You must shine your flashlight on him to drive him away, suggesting that light, literal or metaphorical, can dispel beings made from darkness. This mechanic reinforces the idea that shadows aren't possessed animatronics, but something fundamentally different. Entities that exist in opposition to light and hope, rather than being trapped souls seeking revenge. The shadow animatronics are forgotten not because they're unimportant, but because they're understudied. They appear so rarely in gameplay that most casual players never encounter them or notice them. When they do appear, they're so strange, so outside the normal rules, that they're difficult to categorize or understand. The lore around them has been developed gradually across multiple games and sources, with key revelations tucked away in mobile games and secondary materials that not every fan engages with. They're the kind of deep lore that dedicated theorists obsess over, while the broader community focuses on more immediate mysteries. But they deserve attention. The shadow animatronics represent FNAF's willingness to embrace ambiguity, to include elements that don't have clean explanations, that exist in the grey areas between the franchise's established rules. They're genuinely unsettling in a way that's different from the jump scare horror of the main animatronics. There's something deeply unnerving about a figure that appears when it shouldn't, watches you without attacking, and then vanishes, leaving you to wonder if you imagined it. Their psychological horror in a series that often leans toward visceral scares, and that makes them special. The community's attempts to understand the shadows have produced some fascinating theories over the years. Some believe they're connected to the spring lock failures mentioned in FNAF 3. Perhaps the manifestations of employees who died in those horrible accidents. Others think they're aspects of William Afton himself. Fragments of his consciousness or manifestations of his malevolence that exist separately from his physical form. Still others propose that they're guardian figures of some kind, mysterious entities that guide events towards specific outcomes, even if we don't understand their methods or motivations. What's certain is that RWQFSSASXC and Shadow Freddy are among FNAF's most enigmatic elements, characters whose presence raises more questions than it answers. They exist at the intersection of the franchise's horror and mystery, beings that are frightening precisely because we don't understand them, because they operate according to rules we haven't fully learned. In a series that's gradually explained most of its mysteries, that's revealed the identities behind the masks and the reasons for the hauntings. The shadow animatronics remain stubbornly opaque, and that opacity is part of their appeal. If you've never encountered Shadow Bonnie in your FNAF 2 playthroughs, you're not alone. The odds are heavily stacked against it. But if you ever do see that dark figure in the corner of your office, take a moment before the game crashes or you look away. Notice how it doesn't move, doesn't breathe, doesn't show any sign of life or intelligence beyond those glowing eyes. It's not trying to harm you. It's just there, existing in a space it shouldn't be able to reach. A piece of the trauma embedded in these buildings given temporary form. And then it's gone. Vanished, like it was never there at all, leaving you to wonder what you actually saw and what it means. That's the power of the shadow animatronics, even now, years after their first appearances. They linger in the mind long after they've disappeared from the screen. From the shadows we move to the stage, though perhaps not the main stage you're thinking of. Not the gleaming performance space where Freddy Fazbear and his band entertain children with polished routines and popular songs. No, this is the budget stage, the cheaper alternative, the entertainment solution for establishments that can't quite afford the premium animatronics, but still need something to draw in the crowds. This is the realm of the mediocre melodies, a band whose very name announces their position in the FNAF hierarchy. They're not meant to be exceptional. They're designed to be adequate, just good enough, performers that fill a niche without breaking the bank. And in their adequacy, in their deliberate mediocrity, they've become one of the most overlooked additions to the FNAF roster. The mediocre melodies debut in Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, that deceptive game that pretends to be a pizza restaurant tycoon simulator before revealing itself as another night guard horror experience. In the daytime sections where you're building your pizzeria, purchasing attractions and decorations and animatronics to make your establishment appealing and profitable, the mediocre melodies appear in the catalogue alongside more expensive and elaborate options. They're available from Stan's Budget Tech, a supplier whose name tells you everything you need to know about the quality of their merchandise. These are the animatronics you buy when you're watching your bottom line, when you need something on stage, but can't afford the top-of-the-line models. The band consists of 5 members, each one a different animal, each one equipped with their own instrument or gimmick. Ned Bear serves as the leader, a brown bear, who's essentially a knockoff of Freddy Fazbear himself, similar enough to evoke the famous mascot without quite matching his polish or appeal. Mr. Hippo is the philosopher of the group, a purple hippopotamus with a flower on his chest and a tendency toward lengthy, meandering stories that may or may not have points. Pigpatch is a banjo-playing pig with mismatched eyes, pink and blue, giving him a slightly off-kilter appearance even by animatronic standards. Happy Frog is the sole female member, a green frog with optimistic energy that doesn't quite match the worn-down aesthetic of her bandmates. And Orville Elephant rounds out the group as the magician, an orange elephant with a purple top hat and a magic wand, speaking with a pompous British accent that suggests delusions of grandeur. As a band, the mediocre melodies are meant to evoke the kind of entertainment you'd find at second-tier family establishments in the 80s and 90s, not the successful chains with nationally recognized mascots, but the local pizza places and family fun centers that cobbled together whatever entertainment they could afford, resulting in mismatched acts with thrift store aesthetics and barely functioning audio systems. The mediocre melodies are FNAF's acknowledgement that not every animatronic band was a polished professional operation like Freddy's. Sometimes you got a weird pig with a banjo and a hippo who wouldn't stop talking, and you just had to work with that. What makes the mediocre melodies interesting is that they're self-aware about their status. The game presents them as budget options, and they embrace it. When you buy them for your pizzeria, you're not getting premium entertainment. You're getting serviceable performers who will do a job for less money than the alternatives. In a franchise that often focuses on tragic victims and malevolent forces, there's something refreshing about animatronics that exist purely as economic entities, performers who are mediocre by design rather than by circumstance. In Pizzeria Simulator's daytime sections, the mediocre melodies serve a practical purpose. They increase your restaurant's appeal without costing too much, making them good early game purchases when you're building up capital. Orville is more expensive than the others and can only be obtained through the Rare Finds auction, suggesting he's slightly higher quality or more sought after than his bandmates, but he's still part of the budget tier. You place them on stages in your pizzeria, and they perform for your virtual customers, generating revenue without requiring the investment that more elaborate animatronics demand. But at night, when the Pizzeria Simulator facade drops and the game reveals its true nature as survival horror, the mediocre melodies become threats. Like the salvaged animatronics that serve as the game's main antagonists, the melodies can attack during the night shifts, navigating through vents and ducts to reach your office. They're not the primary danger, not the main focus of the gameplay, but they add another layer of threat, another element to monitor and defend against. Their mechanics are relatively simple compared to the more elaborate systems governing Scrap Baby or Molten Freddy, but they require attention. And in a game where attention is your most limited resource, every additional threat matters. Mr. Hippo in particular has become something of a cult favorite in the FNAF community, not for his gameplay mechanics, but for his death quotes. When Mr. Hippo kills you in Pizzeria Simulator, instead of simply triggering a game over, he launches into one of 4 lengthy monologues, rambling stories about mundane topics that have no relevance whatsoever to anything happening in the game. He'll tell you about the time he went to the park with his friend Orville and tried to feed ducks bread, but then got into a misunderstanding about whether the ducks or the breadcrumbs were frozen. He'll recount the process of buying rye bread for a sandwich, complete with unnecessary details about getting sidetracked in the store. He'll philosophize about whether every story needs significance or if sometimes a story is just a story. These monologues are absurdly long, especially in a game where dying usually means restarting quickly to try again. And here's the thing. If you try to skip Mr. Hippo's stories, he starts over from the beginning. You have to sit through the entire rambling tale, listening to this purple hippopotamus animatronic lecture you about the meaning of narrative and the importance of not reading too much into things. It's simultaneously frustrating and hilarious, a piece of deliberate comedy in a horror game. Scott Cawthon taking a moment to poke fun at his own fanbase's tendency to analyze every detail for hidden meaning. The irony is beautiful. In a franchise where every pixel is scrutinized, every color choice debated, every line of dialogue picked apart for lore implications, Mr. Hippo tells you that sometimes a story doesn't mean anything. Sometimes it's just about a hippo trying to feed ducks and getting confused about frozen birds. The stories are deliberately pointless, deliberately tedious, a gentle ribbing of the theorist community that spent hundreds of hours trying to solve FNAF's mysteries. And yet, even Mr. Hippo's pointless stories have been analyzed by fans, with people trying to extract meaning from the very stories designed to have none. The other mediocre melodies have their own personality quirks revealed through their ultimate custom night voice lines. Pigpatch speaks in a southern drawl, quoting Sun Tzu's The Art of War, before playing his banjo, creating a bizarre juxtaposition between ancient Chinese military strategy and hillbilly music. Orville speaks in that affected British accent, his voice dripping with theatrical flair as he announces his presence and your imminent demise. Happy Frog is chipper and enthusiastic, her voice bright even as she's about to jump scare you. Ned Bear is the most straightforward of the bunch, without the elaborate personality of his bandmates, but with occasional voice lines that suggest something darker lurking beneath the surface. That darkness is significant. In Ultimate Custom Night, certain voice lines from the mediocre melodies, specifically Happy Frog, Ned Bear, and Orville Elephant, are followed by whispered echoes that repeat their words with a more sinister tone. This audio design choice has led to interpretations within the community that something supernatural might be speaking through them. Based on UCN's context as what many interpret to be William Afton's personal purgatory, these whispers could imply that the spirits of his victims are using whatever vessels are available to communicate their rage. Whether these whispers represent a specific spirit or are simply part of UCN's nightmarish atmosphere remains open to interpretation, but they add an unsettling layer to what are otherwise straightforward budget animatronics. In Security Breach and its subsequent content, the mediocre melodies make background appearances. Some of their parts or likenesses can be spotted in various locations throughout the Pizzaplex, suggesting that even decades after their original deployment, pieces of these budget animatronics persist. They're not active characters in that game, not threats or even NPCs with agency, but their presence as background details reinforces that they were once part of Fazbear Entertainment's broader ecosystem. What makes the mediocre melodies forgotten is their timing and their purpose. They appeared in Pizzeria Simulator alongside much more important characters, Scrap Baby, Molten Freddy, Scrap Trap, and Lefty, all of whom had significant roles in the game's true plot and the series' overarching lore. The melodies were essentially filler, extra animatronics to populate your pizzeria and add variety to the night sections, but they weren't essential to the story being told. When players remember Pizzeria Simulator, they remember Henry's speech, the fire that finally ended the cycle, the revelation that you've been gathering all the haunted animatronics in one place to destroy them. The mediocre melodies are a footnote to that story, purchasable assets that happen to also be nighttime threats. They're also forgotten because they don't connect cleanly to the main narrative. Most FNAF animatronics have some relationship to the core story, the missing children, William Afton's crimes, the families torn apart by tragedy. The mediocre melodies are just performers. They exist because Fazbear Entertainment needed budget options for their lower-end establishments, and they persisted because cheap animatronics have a way of sticking around long past their prime. They're not victims or villains in the traditional sense. They're products, commercial entities that happened to get caught up in supernatural events, but weren't central to those events' origins. But there's value in that disconnect. The mediocre melodies remind us that Fazbear Entertainment was a real company with normal business operations, making practical decisions about how to equip their restaurants and entertain their customers. Not every animatronic was built to lure and murder children. Not every performance was hiding a dark secret. Sometimes a pizza place just needed something on stage to justify the entertainment part of the business model. And the mediocre melodies filled that mundane need. They're the animatronics that would exist in a world where the murders never happened, where Fazbear Entertainment was just another family entertainment company trying to compete with Chuck E. Cheese and Showbiz Pizza. In exploring why they're forgotten, we also discover why they matter. They add depth to the FNAF universe by acknowledging its mundane aspects. They provide comic relief, especially through Mr. Hippo's rambling stories, in a series that's often relentlessly dark. They show us that Scott Cawthon can create animatronics with personality and charm, even when those animatronics aren't tied to any grand mystery or tragic backstory. The mediocre melodies are good character design exercise, proof that FNAF's aesthetic can extend beyond horror into genuine entertainment, even if that entertainment is deliberately mediocre. Each member of the mediocre melodies brings something unique to their ensemble. Ned Bear, as the leader, represents the knockoff phenomenon that exists in any successful brand. There's always some budget establishment trying to capture the magic of the original with a similar but not quite the same mascot. Ned Bear is what you get when you want Freddy Fazbear but can't afford the licensing fees or the quality standards. His design is close enough to evoke the famous bear without being legally actionable. His presence on stage adequate without being impressive. In a way, Ned Bear is the most honest animatronic in the franchise because he doesn't pretend to be more than he is. He's mediocre by design, and he owns it. Mr. Hippo's philosophical tendencies deserve deeper examination. His stories aren't just random rambling. They're deliberately constructed to frustrate players who expect meaning in everything. When he talks about feeding ducks bread in winter, about misunderstandings with his friend Orville, about the mundane details of buying sandwich ingredients, he's actively deconstructing the player's expectations. The FNAF community has trained itself to analyze every word, every color, every number for hidden significance. Mr. Hippo's pointless monologues are Scott Cawthon's way of saying, sometimes a story is just a story. Even as fans inevitably analyze those very monologues for deeper meaning. It's a beautiful paradox. A character whose defining trait is meaninglessness becoming meaningful through that very trait. The relationship between Mr. Hippo and Orville Elephant, mentioned repeatedly in Mr. Hippo's stories, but never explored through Orville's own dialogue, adds another layer to their characters. Mr. Bray. Hippo speaks fondly of Orville, recounting their adventures in parks and grocery stores, but Orville never mentions Mr. Hippo in return. This one-sided friendship, where one character clearly values the relationship while the other remains silent about it, mirrors real dynamics where people have different perspectives on the same friendship. It's unexpectedly nuanced character work for animatronics in a horror game about possessed robots. Pigpatch's banjo playing and Sun Tzu quotes create an absurd juxtaposition that perfectly encapsulates the mediocre Melodies aesthetic. The image of a pig animatronic in overalls, mismatched eyes giving him a perpetually off-kilter look, speaking about ancient Chinese military strategy before launching into hillbilly music, is inherently ridiculous. But it's also memorable. Pigpatch commits to his bit completely, taking himself seriously even when everything about his presentation is fundamentally silly. There's something admirable about that commitment, even if the commitment is to being a banjo-playing pig who quotes The Art of War. Happy Frog's role as the sole female member of the mediocre Melodies is interesting from a design perspective. In the classic FNAF bands, Chica served as the token female animatronic among male characters. Happy Frog fills that same role for the Melodies, but her characterization is notably different. Where Chica's personality in Ultimate Custom Night tends toward aggression and hunger, Happy Frog is genuinely upbeat, maintaining her cheerful demeanor even while attacking you. Her voice lines in UCN are enthusiastic and positive, suggesting that her happiness isn't an act, but a genuine aspect of her programming. In a roster full of bitter, angry, or philosophical animatronics, Happy Frog's sincere enthusiasm stands out. Orville Elephant's magician persona and British accent place him firmly in the tradition of theatrical entertainers who take themselves perhaps too seriously. His pompous delivery, his dramatic flair, his references to performances and audiences all suggest an animatronic who sees himself as an artist rather than a budget attraction. The disconnect between Orville's self-perception and his actual status as a mediocre melody creates gentle comedy. He's a magician whose magic tricks probably don't work very well, performing in restaurants that can barely afford him, for audiences who'd rather eat pizza than watch his act. But he performs anyway. Dignity intact, hat floating through unseen mechanisms, wand raised in theatrical triumph. The cost structure of the mediocre Melodies in Pizzeria Simulator reflects their status within Fazbear Entertainment's economy. They're affordable, but not free, occupying a middle ground between the high-end animatronics and the complete absence of entertainment. A new restaurant owner weighing options must decide whether the mediocre Melodies are worth the investment, or if the budget would be better spent elsewhere. This economic simulation, brief as it is in the game, adds realism to the FNAF universe. It acknowledges that running these establishments involves real financial decisions, that animatronics are assets with price tags, that entertainment comes in tiers based on what you can afford. The achievement unlocked by collecting all 5 mediocre Melodies is aptly named, simply, Mediocre Melodies, with no additional flourish or commentary. The game doesn't celebrate your completion of this set. It acknowledges it plainly, matter-of-factly, in keeping with the character's whole aesthetic. You've purchased the budget band, you've assembled the full mediocre lineup, and the game marks this accomplishment with the same energy the band itself brings to performances. It's adequate recognition for an adequate achievement, and there's something perfect about that. In the broader context of animatronic bands across FNAF's history, the mediocre Melodies represent the franchise's maturity and willingness to expand beyond its original formula. Early games featured iconic characters driven by tragedy and mystery. Later games introduced more complex relationships between animatronics and their human creators. The mediocre Melodies exist in a space beyond both these approaches. They're not tragic victims or complex characters with deep lore. They're simply performers, adequately entertaining, economically viable, existing because restaurants need something on stage, and these 5 fit the bill. Their mundanity is their strength, proving that FNAF's universe can sustain characters who aren't defined by horror or mystery. The voice acting for the mediocre melodies deserves specific praise. Each character has a distinct vocal quality that immediately establishes their personality. Joe Gourdet voices Mr. Hippo with a calm, grandfatherly tone that makes his rambling stories feel like a relative who's trapped you at a family gathering. Orville's performer captures that theatrical British accent perfectly, all pomp and circumstance without irony. Pigpatch's southern drawl is laid back yet knowing, suggesting more intelligence than his appearance implies. Happy Frog's voice is bright and sincere, maintaining enthusiasm that could easily have been obnoxious, but instead comes across as genuinely cheerful. Ned Bear's voice is straightforward, workmanlike, appropriate for a knockoff who isn't trying to be fancy. These voice performances elevate what could have been throwaway characters into memorable personalities. Even players who never delve deeply into FNAF lore tend to remember Mr. Hippo's stories because of how they're delivered, the pacing, the philosophical tangents, the sense that this hippopotamus genuinely believes his rambling has a point, even if listeners can't find it. The mediocre melodies prove that good voice direction can make even minor characters memorable. That personality conveyed through dialogue and delivery can overcome limited screen time or narrative importance. If you've never purchased the full set of mediocre melodies in Pizzeria Simulator, or encountered them all in Ultimate Custom Night, you've missed out on one of FNAF's more purely enjoyable elements. They're not scary in the traditional sense, not the stuff of nightmares like some of the franchise's more iconic horrors, but they're memorable, each one distinct, each one contributing to the sense that FNAF's world is larger and more varied than any single game can fully capture. And, in Mr. C, Hippo's endless stories about nothing in particular, there's a reminder that sometimes, in the midst of all the lore and theory and mystery, it's okay to just enjoy something simple and pointless. Sometimes a hippo talking about frozen ducks is exactly what you need, even if it means sitting through a 5-minute monologue after a game over. That's the magic of the mediocre melodies, even if most of the FNAF community has forgotten they exist. Beneath your desk, in the shadowed space, where light from your monitor doesn't quite reach, there's a figure. If you pull down the camera feed at just the right moment, if chance aligns in that specific way that feels almost like the game itself is reaching out to you, you'll see her. Balloon Girl, JJ, the forgotten sibling of Balloon Boy, rendered in blues and purples instead of her brother's reds and blues, sitting silently under your workspace while her more active counterpart wanders the halls, making your life miserable. She doesn't laugh like BB does. She doesn't disable your flashlight. She doesn't do anything at all, actually. She just sits there, watching, existing in that liminal space between Easter egg and actual character. And then she's gone, vanished as mysteriously as she appeared. This is JJ, and if you're struggling to remember her, you're part of the majority. JJ appears in Five Nights at Freddy's 2 as one of the game's rarest and most easily missed elements. While playing through your nights, monitoring cameras and winding music boxes, and trying to survive the onslaught of possessed animatronics, there's a small chance that when you lower your monitor, you'll find JJ crouched under the desk in your office. She stares directly at you with pink eyes, completely motionless, a palette-swapped version of Balloon Boy in what appears to be a girl's configuration. Unlike every other animatronic in the game, she doesn't attack, doesn't move, doesn't even cause a system failure. She's just there, and then she's not, vanishing when you raise the monitor again. The name JJ comes from the game's files, where her sprite is labeled as such. Like RWQSFASXC, this designation tells us nothing definitive about what JJ actually stands for, if it stands for anything at all. The community has proposed various interpretations: Juggling Jane, Joyful Jester, or simply JJ as a full name rather than initials, though none of these have been confirmed by official sources. The community eventually adopted Balloon Girl as a more descriptive nickname, emphasizing her connection to Balloon Boy. But JJ stuck as well, simple and mysterious and fitting for a character whose entire existence is shrouded in ambiguity. Unlike Phone Dude, whose fan-given name matched his personality perfectly, or Shadow Bonnie, whose unpronounceable file name got replaced with something more manageable. JJ's designation remains officially unexplained, even as fans have used it for years. In terms of gameplay, JJ's impact is non-existent. She doesn't contribute to the challenge of FNAF 2. She doesn't add mechanics to learn or threats to defend against. Her appearance is purely atmospheric, a moment of "what was that?" before the game moves on. This makes her fundamentally different from almost every other animatronic in the franchise, which exists primarily as gameplay obstacles first and characters second. JJ is entirely character, entirely Easter egg, a fleeting presence that contributes nothing to your odds of survival. This has led to endless speculation about what JJ represents within FNAF's lore. Some theories position her as connected to the shadow animatronics, another manifestation of agony or dark remnant given form. She appears and disappears like shadows do, exists outside normal animatronic behavior like shadows do, and doesn't attack like shadows don't. Her coloration, purple and blue, could link her to the color scheme associated with shadow entities and William Afton's purple guy sprite. But unlike RWQSFASXC and the Shadow Freddy, JJ doesn't have any later appearances that clarify her nature or origin. She shows up in FNAF 2, gets brief references in FNAF World and Pizzeria Simulator's minigames, and receives a proper mechanic in Ultimate Custom Night. But she never gets the explanation that other mysterious characters eventually receive. In FNAF World, the cute RPG spin-off, where all the animatronics exist in colorful, deformed versions of themselves, JJ appears as a playable character with her own stats and abilities. This confirms her status as an actual animatronic within the franchise, rather than just a hallucination or glitch, placing her on equal footing with characters like Freddy and Bonnie, despite her minimal presence in the main series. Her inclusion suggests Scott Cawthon considers her a legitimate part of the roster, even if her role is more limited than most. Ultimate Custom Night gives JJ her most substantial gameplay appearance. Here, she functions similarly to Balloon Boy, attempting to sneak through the right side vent into your office. If she succeeds, she disables all your door controls for approximately 10 seconds before vanishing, leaving you vulnerable to any animatronic that might be approaching. This mechanic finally gives JJ something to do beyond simply existing, making her an actual threat rather than just an eerie presence. She even has the voice lines in UCN, giggling like BB does, establishing that she shares her counterpart's annoying personality, even if her execution of that personality is slightly different. But for most fans, JJ's relevance begins and ends with that FNAF 2 Easter egg. She's remembered, if at all, as that weird thing under the desk, or Girl Balloon Boy, a curiosity rather than a character. Part of this forgetting stems from how rare she is. Many players complete FNAF 2 without ever seeing JJ, her appearance chance, low enough that you could play through dozens of nights and never encounter her. Unlike Golden Freddy, whose rare appearances in FNAF 1 became legendary, or the Shadow animatronics, whose mysterious nature inspired countless theories, JJ was just subtle enough, just inconsequential enough, that she failed to capture widespread attention. There's also the Balloon Boy problem. BB himself is one of FNAF's most annoying animatronics, disabling your flashlight and leaving you vulnerable to Foxy while laughing in that high-pitched, irritating voice. He's memorable for all the wrong reasons. A character most players associate with frustration rather than horror. JJ, as BB's apparent counterpart, inherits some of that baggage. She's connected to the franchise's most annoying element, and even though she doesn't share BB's gameplay-ruining mechanic in her original appearance, the association is enough to make her less appealing as a subject of interest. The question of what JJ represents narratively has never been satisfactorily answered. She's too distinct to be just a visual glitch, too deliberate in her design and placement to be meaningless. But unlike almost every other mystery in FNAF, which eventually receives some form of clarification through later games or secondary materials, JJ remains unexplained. Is she another Balloon Boy unit? A second animatronic of the same model customized with different colors? Is she a hallucination? Something the night guard sees that doesn't actually exist? Is she supernatural, a ghost, or shadow manifesting in the form of BB's counterpart? The franchise has never told us, and at this point, it might never. Some fans have theorized that JJ represents one of the new victims from a FNAF 2's second missing children incident, a child whose soul inhabited this variant Balloon Boy animatronic. The Save Them minigame shows multiple bodies scattered around the FNAF 2 location, more victims of William Afton's murders, and it's possible that JJ is one of these spirits. But there's no evidence for this beyond speculation, no dialogue or visual cue that would confirm possession. She's just there, sitting under your desk, offering no context for her existence. Others think JJ is entirely non-supernatural, simply a backup animatronic stored under the desk that occasionally activates when you're not looking. This would explain her sudden appearances and disappearances. She's turning on when she detects movement, then powering down when the coast is clear. But this doesn't explain why she's designed as a female counterpart to BB, why she's kept under the night guard's desk of all places, or why she never appears in any other context within the building. A mundane explanation doesn't quite fit with how she behaves. The most honest assessment might be that JJ is an Easter egg that took on more significance than originally intended. Scott Cawthon included her as a rare surprise. A what-if Balloon Boy had a sister gag that wasn't meant to connect to any larger mystery? But because FNAF fans analyze everything, because every detail in these games has been scrutinized for potential lore implications, JJ got swept up in the theorizing despite having no actual lore role. Sometimes a palette swap is just a palette swap, a way to create visual variety or surprise players without needing to model an entirely new character. JJ might simply be that, a fun surprise that doesn't need explanation. But even if that's true, even if JJ is ultimately meaningless to FNAF's narrative, she still represents something interesting about the franchise. She's one of those elements that makes the games feel larger than they are, that suggests a world beyond what we see. The existence of a variant Balloon Boy implies manufacturing decisions, suggests that Fazbear Entertainment made multiple versions of their animatronics for different purposes or locations. It hints at a richer history than we've been shown, at design iterations and alternate configurations that make the world feel more real. In the broader context of FNAF's forgotten characters, JJ occupies a unique position. She's not forgotten because she was replaced by more important reveals, or because her story concluded and the franchise moved on. She's forgotten because she barely existed in the first place. A momentary presence that never evolved into something more substantial. She had potential to be explored further, to be given meaning and purpose, but that potential was never realized. She remains exactly what she was in that first FNAF 2 appearance, a girl under a desk, watching you silently, telling you nothing. If you've never seen JJ in your FNAF 2 playthroughs, you might want to know you're not missing much. She's a brief surprise, a moment of, that's weird, and then she's gone. But there's also something melancholy about a character designed to appear and vanish, to exist in the margins of a game without ever participating in its main action. JJ is a ghost in multiple senses, both potentially supernatural and definitely haunting the periphery of FNAF's story. She deserves acknowledgement for what she is, a small mystery that remains unsolved, a character who existed long enough to make us wonder, but not long enough to provide answers. And in a franchise built on mysteries, perhaps that's the most fitting tribute to her fleeting presence. The walls of Fazbear's Fright are old, the animatronic parts scattered around even older, and the ventilation system, as Phone Dude cheerfully warned, is temperamental at best. When the airflow fails, when oxygen gets thin and the atmosphere becomes thick with dust and the smell of decay, your vision begins to change. Colors wash out, becoming muted greens and browns, and in the corners of your cameras, in the hallway outside your office, figures begin to appear. They look like the animatronics you remember from earlier games, but something is wrong with them. They're burnt, charred, falling apart in ways that shouldn't be possible. Their eyes are hollow black voids with pinprick white pupils, and they stare at you with an intensity that makes your skin crawl. These are the Phantom animatronics, and they represent FNAF 3's unique approach to horror, shifting from physical threats that can kill you to psychological torment that makes your job harder without directly ending your night. The phantoms appear throughout FNAF 3 as hallucinations triggered by poor ventilation and the general atmosphere of dread permeating the horror attraction. Unlike the animatronics in previous games, they can't actually kill you. When a phantom jump scares you, you don't get a game over. Instead, you suffer a system failure. Either your ventilation goes offline, or your audio systems fritz out, forcing you to waste precious seconds rebooting them while Springtrap continues his inexorable approach to your office. The phantoms are obstacles rather than direct threats, complications that make Springtrap more dangerous by distracting you and disabling the tools you need to track and lure him away. There are 6 Phantom animatronics in total, each one based on a character from previous games. Phantom Freddy resembles the withered golden Freddy from FNAF 2, a hulking figure that walks slowly past your office window. If you stare at him too long, he'll duck down out of sight and then jump scare you moments later. Phantom Chica appears on the arcade machine in one of your cameras, her face filling the screen in stark black and white. If you don't switch away quickly, she'll activate. And later, when you look to the left side of your office, she'll be there, triggering her jump scare. Phantom Foxy can appear randomly when you look to the left in your office, startling you with his sudden presence. Phantom Mangle hangs from the ceiling on one of your cameras, and if you linger too long, she'll play loud static through your audio system, disabling those devices until you reboot them. Phantom Balloon Boy shows up on multiple cameras. And if you accidentally play audio on a camera where he's present or look at him too long, he'll appear in your office and jump scare you. And Phantom Puppet, perhaps the most unsettling of the bunch, appears on one camera and will lower your monitor if you don't switch away, then stare at you for several seconds, completely immobile, before vanishing and leaving you to deal with the consequences of lost time. Each phantom has their own triggering conditions, their own timing, their own way of making your night more difficult without directly threatening your life. The phantom's appearance is distinctive and symbolic. They're all rendered in muted, burnt colors, primarily greens, browns, and grays, with that charred, damaged look that makes them appear as though they've already been through fire. This aesthetic choice foreshadows the ending of FNAF 3, where Fazbear's Fright burns down, the flames consuming the attraction and presumably destroying its contents. The phantoms look like victims of that fire before it happens, temporal echoes or premonitions showing you what's coming. Their burnt appearance also connects them visually to Springtrap, who himself is a burnt, decayed thing. William Afton's corpse merged with a rotting Spring Bonnie suite after decades sealed in a wall. Everything in FNAF 3 is touched by decay and destruction, and the phantoms embody that atmosphere perfectly. But what exactly are the phantoms? The game itself offers a straightforward mechanical explanation through Phone Dude's warnings about ventilation. Keep the air flowing, or you'll start seeing crazy stuff. Within the context of gameplay, this explains why the ventilation system is important and why the phantom animatronics appear when it fails, suggesting they're hallucinations caused by poor air quality. This practical explanation fits with the game's emphasis on Fazbear's Fright being a cheap, hastily assembled horror attraction with serious safety issues, where oxygen deprivation could indeed cause visual disturbances. However, the franchise's established supernatural elements complicate this simple interpretation. FNAF has shown us that spirits can manifest visually, that possession and hauntings are real phenomena in this universe, that the line between hallucination and genuine paranormal activity often blurs. Some fans interpret the phantoms not as hallucinations at all, but as actual spirits, potentially the original murdered children still lingering in some form, or manifestations of the agony embedded in the animatronic parts scattered throughout Fazbear's Fright. The attraction was built using relics from the old Freddy Fazbear's Pizza locations, including actual animatronic parts, and the residual spiritual energy in these items could manifest under certain conditions. There's also the interpretation that the phantoms are created or influenced by Springtrap himself, either intentionally or as a side effect of his presence. They all share his signature white pupils in their empty black eyes, the same distinctive feature that Springtrap displays, suggesting some connection between the primary antagonist and these manifestations. Whether this connection is deliberate manipulation on William Afton's part, or simply a shared supernatural nature, remains open to interpretation. What's interesting about the phantoms from a gameplay perspective is that they force you to make choices. Do you risk looking at that camera where Phantom BB might appear, or do you avoid it and potentially lose track of Springtrap? Do you spend time watching Phantom Freddy walk across your window, or do you bring up your monitor immediately, trusting that you won't stare too long? The phantoms aren't difficult to avoid once you know their patterns, but they add mental load to an already stressful situation, creating moments where you have to weigh risk against reward. In Ultimate Custom Night, 3 of the phantoms return: Phantom Freddy, Phantom Mangle, and Phantom Balloon Boy all appear with similar mechanics to their FNAF 3 incarnations, though adjusted for UCN's different gameplay flow. Notably, Phantom Chica and Phantom Puppet don't appear in UCN, making them the most forgotten of the forgotten. Phantoms that showed up in one game and were never seen again. Phantom Foxy also doesn't appear, though his absence might be because multiple Foxy variants were already included in UCN's roster. In FNAF VR, Help Wanted, the FNAF 3 levels include most of the Phantoms as part of the experience, though their implementation is adjusted for virtual reality. You can now look around more freely, making it easier to spot and avoid them, but their jump scares are more visceral in VR. The sudden appearance of a burnt animatronic face filling your vision more startling than it was in the flat-screen game. Help Wanted treats the Phantoms as authentic elements of FNAF 3's experience, rather than dismissing them as mere hallucinations, suggesting they're significant enough to preserve in the franchise's ongoing narrative. Despite these appearances, the Phantoms remain largely overlooked in FNAF discussions. They're remembered as mechanics from FNAF 3, rather than as characters in their own right. People talk about Springtrap, about the minigames, about the good ending and the bad ending, but the Phantoms are just those hallucination things that made the nights harder. They lack the lore significance of possessed animatronics, the mystery of shadow entities, or the personality of performers like the mediocre melodies. They're functional elements that did their job and then faded from focus. Part of their forgotten status comes from how FNAF 3 structured its horror. Previous games featured multiple animatronics that could kill you, creating variety in threats and requiring you to manage different approaches to different characters. FNAF 3 simplified this to one real threat, Springtrap, with everything else serving as complications. This made the game feel more focused, but also meant that the secondary elements, including the Phantoms, felt less important. They were obstacles between you and the real danger rather than dangers themselves. The Phantoms also suffer from being based on existing characters without adding much to those characters' stories. Phantom Freddy looks like Golden Freddy, but tells us nothing new about Golden Freddy. Phantom Puppet appears as the marionette, but doesn't expand on the puppet's lore. They're aesthetic echoes, visual callbacks that create continuity with earlier games without developing the franchise's mythology. For a fan base hungry for new information and story progression, the Phantoms offered little beyond nostalgia and atmosphere. But atmosphere matters in horror, and the Phantoms contribute significantly to FNAF 3's oppressive mood. They make Fazbear's Fright feel haunted in a way that goes beyond Springtrap's presence. The attraction is filled with ghosts, with memories, with the weight of past tragedies manifesting in your peripheral vision. Every camera could show you something that shouldn't be there. Every glance to the left might reveal a burnt animatronic fox staring back. The Phantoms create an environment where you're never quite safe, where even looking around could trigger consequences, where the building itself seems hostile to your survival. Their burnt appearance also serves as a constant reminder of FNAF's core tragedy. These animatronics represent children who died, whose souls were trapped in metal bodies, who've been through literal and metaphorical fires over the decades. Seeing them burnt and damaged, especially when some of them look exactly like the characters from FNAF 1 that represented the original 5 victims, drives home how much suffering has occurred in these locations. They're not just scary images, they're manifestations of trauma, visible representations of pain that refuses to be forgotten even as time passes. In examining why the Phantoms are forgotten, we should also acknowledge what they represent in FNAF's evolution as a series. They mark the franchise's shift toward more complex, less direct horror. FNAF 1 through 4 featured animatronics that could kill you, threats that were immediate and physical. Starting with Sister Location and continuing through later games, FNAF began incorporating more psychological elements, more ambiguity about what's real and what's not, more horror that comes from atmosphere and implication rather than jump scares. The Phantoms are early examples of this shift, harbingers of a more nuanced approach to fear that the franchise would continue to explore. If you've played FNAF 3 recently, take a moment to appreciate the Phantoms for what they are. Notice how they're designed, how each one is specifically constructed to create unease. Pay attention to their timing, the way they appear just when you're focusing on something else, forcing you to react quickly or suffer the consequences. Listen for the audio cues that sometimes accompany their appearances, the subtle shifts in sound design that signal danger. The Phantoms might not be the most important elements of FNAF 3's story, but they're integral to its experience, to the feeling of dread and claustrophobia that makes the game work. They deserve recognition for being effective at their purpose, even if that purpose wasn't to become beloved characters or crucial lore elements. Sometimes being a good horror mechanic is enough, even if it means being forgotten once players move on to the next game, the next threat, the next mystery to solve. In the newspaper clippings that flash across your screen after completing Night 6 of Five Nights at Freddy's 2, the headlines tell a grim story. Local pizzeria threatened with shutdown over sanitation. Local pizzeria said to close by year's end. And in that second article, buried in the text, a crucial line: the new animatronics will be scrapped due to possible malfunctions. However, the original characters are being kept in hopes of a possible reorganization of the company. This single sentence seals the fate of an entire cast of characters. The toy animatronics, those modern, sleek, kid-friendly performers who were supposed to represent Fazbear Entertainment's fresh start. They lasted less than a week before being deemed effective, their brief existence ending in dismantlement and disposal. Their story is one of the franchise's most tragic, not because they died dramatically, but because they barely lived at all. The toy animatronics were introduced in FNAF 2 as the new face of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, a complete redesign meant to distance the company from the dark history of missing children and mysterious incidents. Toy Freddy, Toy Bonnie, Toy Chica, and Mangle, along with Balloon Boy and the Puppet, represented a significant investment in new technology. They had facial recognition systems linked to criminal databases, advanced mobility allowing them to walk around during the day, and cheerful, glossy designs that were less intimidating than their predecessors. These were animatronics built to be safe, to be modern, to prove that Fazbear Entertainment had learned from past mistakes and was ready to provide quality family entertainment without the sinister undertones. Their failure was swift and total. Within the week of gameplay that FNAF 2 covers, everything goes wrong. The animatronics behave aggressively towards staff, staring at adults with disturbing intensity while interacting normally with children. A new missing children incident occurs. William Afton returning in a Spring Bonnie suit to murder again, his victims possessing the toy animatronics in the Save Them minigame. And then the Bite of 87 happens. Some animatronic, most likely one of the toys, biting a person's frontal lobe out during a birthday party, causing severe brain damage and prompting immediate closure of the location. In less than 7 days, The toys went from promising new attractions to liability nightmares, their malfunctions and the violence associated with them making them unsalvageable in Fazbear Entertainment's eyes. The scrapping process is mentioned but not shown. We know from that newspaper that the toy animatronics were dismantled, their parts salvaged for use in repairing the withered original animatronics that had been relegated to the parts and service room. This means the toys were literally cannibalized, their endoskeletons, servos, facial recognition systems, and other components ripped out and integrated into older models to bring Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy back to operational status for the FNAF 1 location. It's a cold, practical decision, waste not want not, but it also means the toys' existence was erased, their advanced technology repurposed, their identities dissolved. The Bite of 87, while confirmed to have occurred at this location based on the timeline, leaves the specific animatronic responsible unclear. Phone Guy's warnings about the characters being moved to the day shift suggest the incident happened during operating hours, and the subsequent scrapping of the toy line implies they were deemed responsible. Though whether this assessment was accurate or simply a corporate liability decision remains ambiguous in the game's narrative. What remains after scrapping? In FNAF 3, we see the answer. A cardboard box in the Fazbear's Fright office contains the hollow heads of Toy Freddy, Toy Bonnie, Toy Chica, Mangle, and Balloon Boy, along with some miscellaneous parts like Toy Bonnie's guitar. These empty shells are all that's left of the toy line, stripped of their endoskeletons and electronics, reduced to props for a horror attraction. They're displayed alongside parts from the classic animatronics, relics from the franchise's history that someone thought would add authenticity to the themed experience. But they're not animatronics anymore. They're just heads, hollow plastic, or whatever material Fazbear Entertainment uses, reminders of what briefly existed. The visual of these empty heads is haunting when you consider what they represent. Each one was once a fully functioning performer, equipped with advanced facial recognition systems, mobile joints, colorful designs meant to appeal to children. Now they're trophies in a box, decorations for a horror attraction that's trying to profit from the very tragedies that led to their creation and destruction. The toy heads stare out with empty eye sockets, their cheerful expressions frozen permanently, incapable of conveying the violence they witnessed, the possessions they hosted, the brief terror of their operational period. They're artifacts of failure, proof that even the most advanced technology and best intentions couldn't escape Fazbear Entertainment's curse. The design evolution visible in the toy animatronics tells its own story. Compared to the original animatronics with their segmented limbs and visible endoskeletons, the toys were sleeker, more refined. Toy Freddy had a glossier finish, rounder features, a design that prioritized approachability over the vague creepiness that made the originals unsettling even before they started attacking night guards. Toy Bonnie was smaller, less threatening, with a guitar that seemed more like a prop than an integral part of his design. Toy Chica embraced a more explicitly feminine aesthetic, complete with pink accents and a cupcake that seemed friendlier than the one paired with classic Chica. These were animatronics designed by committee, focus grouped, optimized for maximum child appeal and minimum lawsuit risk. But that very optimization made them less interesting as characters. The original animatronics had personality through their age and wear, their visible mechanical components, their slight asymmetries that suggested decades of repairs and modifications. The toys were too perfect, too new, too obviously manufactured rather than built and rebuilt over years. Their brief operational period meant they never developed the patina of history that makes the classics iconic. They were replaced before they could become beloved, scrapped before they could accumulate the stories and associations that turn mascots into cultural touchstones. Toy Freddy's fate is particularly noteworthy because he was positioned as the new face of the franchise, the updated version of Fazbear Entertainment's flagship character. Marketing materials from the FNAF 2 era would have featured Toy Freddy prominently. His modern design meant to signal that this wasn't your older sibling's Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. This was new, improved, safe for a new generation. The fact that he lasted less than a week before the location closed and he was dismantled speaks to how thoroughly the experiment failed. Toy Freddy never got the chance to build his own identity separate from being New Freddy. He's remembered primarily as the animatronic that wasn't as good as the original, a failed replacement whose main contribution to FNAF lore was proving that you can't escape the past by simply building new machines. Toy Bonnie's guitar, one of the few toy parts preserved beyond just empty heads, represents an interesting choice by whoever assembled Fazbear's Fright's attractions. Why save the guitar but nothing else? Perhaps it was recognizable merchandise, an iconic prop that visitors would remember from the restaurant chain's heyday. Perhaps it was simply convenient to grab, lightweight enough to transport and display without effort. Or perhaps someone at Fazbear's Fright felt that Toy Bonnie's guitar was worth keeping as a musical instrument, functional apart from its animatronic owner. Whatever the reason, that guitar's survival when Toy Bonnie himself was reduced to a hollow head adds a layer of melancholy. The instrument outlasted the musician. The prop survived when the performer was destroyed. Toy Chica's behavior in FNAF 2, where she removes her beak and eyes during the night, leaving her with a gaping empty mouth and black voids where her eyes should be, has never been fully explained. It's one of the most unsettling visual moments in a series full of unsettling visuals, transforming a cute chicken performer into something nightmarish. The fact that Toy Chica does this voluntarily, that it seems to be part of her routine rather than a malfunction, suggests either a disturbing aspect of her programming or the influence of whatever spirit possessed her during the Save Them incident. When we see Toy Chica's head in the FNAF 3 box, that beak is presumably reattached, her eyes back in place, her appearance restored to the cheerful default. But players who faced her in FNAF 2 will always remember that empty, beakless face emerging from the darkness. Mangle's story deserves extended examination because it's the most tragic of the toy animatronics. Designed as Toy Foxy, she was meant to be an interactive attraction in Kids Cove, something children could play with hands-on. This was always a risky design choice. Children aren't gentle. They pull, they twist, they disassemble things to see how they work. Toy Foxy was built to withstand this, to some degree, designed so that kids could take her apart and put her back together as part of the attraction's appeal. But the reality proved more destructive than anticipated. Kids weren't carefully disassembling and reassembling Toy Foxy. They were ripping her apart, pulling wires, disconnecting joints, treating her as a toy to be destroyed rather than a puzzle to be solved. The staff's decision to stop repairing her, to leave her as Mangle permanently, is understandable from a resource perspective, but cruel from an existence perspective. Imagine being designed as a performer, built to entertain and engage with children, only to be literally torn apart daily by those same children. Then imagine the people responsible for maintaining you simply giving up, deciding it's not worth the effort to keep fixing you, so they leave you in your broken state as a permanent fixture. Mangle existed in constant disassembly, her endoskeleton exposed, her parts dangling from wires and cords, her second head, an endoskeleton head for reasons that are never explained, swinging loose alongside her main skull. She was both attraction and warning, something for kids to play with and proof of what happens when play becomes destruction. Mangle's voice in FNAF 2 is a garbled mess of radio signals and distorted sounds, as if her vocal systems were damaged beyond repair but still attempting to function. The sound is unsettling, neither mechanical nor organic, something in between that shouldn't be possible. When Mangle attacks in FNAF 2, that distorted voice is part of her jump scare, her damaged state making her more frightening than she would have been intact. It's a rare case in FNAF where destruction made a character more memorable rather than less, where being broken became her defining feature. But it also means that Mangle never got to be what she was meant to be. Toy Foxy's original personality, her intended role, her design purpose, all were lost in the dismantlement. Mangle is all we have, and Mangle is a tragedy. The spirits inhabiting the toy animatronics, assuming the Save Them incident resulted in possessions, had even briefer existences than the animatronics themselves. These children were murdered, their spirits bound to machines that were already doomed, animatronics that would be scrapped within days. If possession worked the same way for the toys as it did for the originals, these spirits woke up inside metal bodies, only to be torn apart almost immediately, their mechanical shells dismantled while they were still trying to understand what had happened to them. Did they feel the scrapping? Did they experience being taken apart piece by piece, their endoskeletons removed, their heads separated from their bodies? The game doesn't tell us, but the possibility is horrifying. What happened to those spirits after the toys were scrapped remains one of FNAF's unanswered questions. The original murdered children's spirits persisted through multiple games, following their animatronic shells through repairs and relocations until they could finally be freed. The toy spirits, if they existed, disappear from the narrative after their hosts are destroyed. Maybe they moved on immediately, released by the destruction of their mechanical prisons. Maybe they lingered as ghosts without anchors, unable to interact with the world the way possessed animatronics can. Maybe they're still out there somewhere, attached to the scattered toy parts, speaking through whatever fragments remain of their shells. We don't know, and at this point, we might never find out. The economic implications of the toy animatronics failure are staggering. Fazbear Entertainment invested heavily in their development. The facial recognition systems alone would have cost significant money, plus the advanced mobility, the modern aesthetics, the marketing push to rebrand the chain. All of that investment was lost within a week. The animatronics scrapped, their location closed. The entire experiment declared a failure. The fact that the company survived this financial disaster, that they managed to reorganize and eventually open another location with repaired versions of the original animatronics, suggests either deep financial reserves or a willingness to continue operating despite mounting losses. Either way, the toy animatronics represent a massive sunk cost. Money spent on a project that generated no return. A business disaster compounding the moral disaster of more murders happening on company property. The choice to use toy parts to repair the withered originals is pragmatic, but symbolically loaded. It means the old animatronics are quite literally wearing pieces of the new ones. Modern components integrated into classic chassis. The failed experiment cannibalized to restore the proven design. When you play FNAF 1 and see Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy in their restored glory, you're looking at animatronics built partially from toy parts. The glossy modern technology is hidden inside weathered exteriors, the advanced systems subsumed into traditional frameworks. It's a perfect metaphor for how Fazbear Entertainment approaches its history, maintaining the appearance of the original while quietly incorporating whatever new elements might improve performance, covering up failures by integrating them into successes. In the broader FNAF timeline, the toy animatronics' brief existence serves as a bridge between eras. They mark the transition from the original missing children incident to the company's attempts at recovery and modernization. They show that William Afton's crimes weren't confined to a single moment, that he returned to murder again, that no amount of security upgrades or facial recognition systems could stop him. They prove that Fazbear Entertainment learned nothing from their mistakes, that they prioritized appearance and profit over actual safety, that their solution to past tragedies was cosmetic redesign rather than fundamental change. The toy's failure is the company's failure. They're scrapping an admission that you can't fix deep problems with surface-level solutions. If the toy animatronics could speak, if they had achieved the kind of self-awareness that some FNAF animatronics display, what would they say about their existence? Would they be bitter about lasting only days before being destroyed? Would they be jealous of the originals, who at least got years of operation before things went wrong? Would they feel cheated, built to be improvements but never given the chance to prove it? Or would they accept their fate with the same blank cheerfulness their designs projected, understanding that some experiments fail and some creations don't survive? We'll never know, because the toys never achieved that level of consciousness. At least, not as far as the games show. They were destroyed too quickly, their potential snuffed out before it could develop into anything lasting. The empty heads in the Fazbear's Fright Box are monuments to that lost potential. They're proof that the toy animatronics existed, that they were real, that for one brief week in 1987, they performed and walked and interacted with children before everything went wrong. They're all that remains of a failed experiment, a cautionary tale about hubris and history, a reminder that some curses can't be broken by simply building new machines. When Fazbear's Fright burned down, those heads presumably burned too. The last physical remnants of the toy line finally destroyed, their brief existence completely erased from the world. All that's left are memories, screenshots, gameplay footage, the digital record of characters who briefly existed before being consigned to FNAF's forgotten corners. And that's perhaps the saddest fate of all, to be remembered only as the animatronics that failed, the performers who never got to prove themselves, the tragedy that happened too quickly to leave a lasting mark. The fate of the toy animatronics after FNAF 3 is unclear. Fazbear's Fright burns down at the end of that game, and it's probable that the box of toy parts was destroyed in the fire. Some pieces might have survived, might have been auctioned off or salvaged by collectors, but for practical purposes, the toy animatronics ceased to exist as coherent entities after their initial scrapping. Unlike the original animatronics, whose parts were used and reused across multiple locations over decades, the toys had one brief deployment and then were gone. This disposability is thematically significant. The toy animatronics represent modernity. Corporate attempts to sanitize and commercialize what should have remained closed and forgotten. They're new, improved, advanced, everything the originals weren't, yet they fail even faster than their predecessors. Their facial recognition systems, meant to protect children, either malfunctioned or were overwhelmed by the supernatural possession that occurred when William Afton murdered again. Their friendly designs couldn't prevent violence. Their mobility made them more dangerous when things went wrong. Every improvement, every advancement became a liability. There's also something deeply sad about animatronics designed to be harmless, ending up possessed and dangerous anyway. The toy animatronics didn't ask to be built. They didn't choose to become hosts for murdered children's spirits. They were manufactured, deployed, inhabited by vengeful ghosts, and then destroyed, their entire existence from construction to dismantlement lasting maybe a few months at most. They never had a chance to be what they were designed to be, safe entertainers for a new generation. They were corrupted before they could fulfill their purpose, and then they were punished for that corruption by being torn apart. Individual toy animatronics have fates worth examining. Toy Freddy, the supposed leader of the group, was simply a more rounded, friendlier version of Freddy Fazbear. His fate is reduction to a hollow head in a box, his advanced systems removed, his potential unfulfilled. Toy Bonnie, designed to be less threatening than the original Bonnie, with his smaller size and brighter colors, suffered the same fate. His guitar saved perhaps as someone's keepsake, but his body destroyed. Toy Chica, the only female animatronic among the main toys, notable for removing her beak and eyes during the night in FNAF 2, exists now only as an empty head, her unsettling behaviors during her active period never fully explained. Mangle deserves special attention. Originally Toy Foxy, this animatronic was stationed in Kids Cove as a build-and-take-apart attraction, something children could interact with directly. But kids being kids, they were too rough, constantly pulling Mangle apart, forcing staff to reassemble her at the end of every shift. Eventually, the staff gave up, leaving Mangle as a perpetually disassembled mess, her endoskeleton exposed, her parts dangling from wires, her head split and jaw hanging loose. She's already destroyed before the location closes, already reduced to parts before the official scrapping even happens. In some ways, Mangle's fate is the most tragic because she suffered her destruction publicly, pulled apart by the very children she was meant to entertain, turned into a grotesque parody of an animatronic before her brief existence ended. Balloon Boy is a special case. He's not one of the main animatronic performers, doesn't have a musical instrument or a place in the show. He's a smaller figure, designed to hand out balloons and entertain kids in a more limited capacity. His survival in FNAF 3, as a hollow head in the box, shows he was considered part of the toy line, but his role was always more auxiliary. BB's defining characteristic is being annoying, disabling your flashlight in FNAF 2 with his laugh, and that annoying quality persists through his later appearances. But his fate is still disposal, his head kept as a curiosity, but his function eliminated. The puppet, despite being active during the toy era, doesn't get scrapped. This is significant because it suggests the puppet is somehow exempt from the normal rules governing animatronics. We now know that the puppet contains Charlie Emily's spirit, Henry's daughter, the first victim of William Afton. The puppet's resistance to destruction, its ability to move between locations and survive where others are torn apart, might stem from Charlie's strong will or Henry's specific design of the animatronic to contain his daughter's spirit. The puppet survives because it has to, because its story isn't finished when the FNAF 2 location closes. The scrapping of the toy animatronics raises questions about the spirits potentially possessing them. In FNAF 2's Save Them minigame, we see what appeared to be dead children whose souls could have inhabited the toy animatronics. though the game never explicitly confirms this possession, occurred in the same way it did with the original animatronics. The fate of these potential spirits after the toys are dismantled is never clearly addressed in the games. The possibilities range from immediate release upon the animatronic's destruction, to lingering without physical anchors, to attachment to scattered parts. Without concrete answers from the source material, their ultimate fate remains one of FNAF's unresolved mysteries. Some fans theorize that the spirits inhabiting the toy animatronics might be the same spirits from the original missing children, somehow transferred or split between multiple animatronics. This would explain the aggressive behavior of both the withered and toy animatronics during FNAF 2's events. However, this theory has significant logical issues and isn't widely accepted within the community. The more straightforward interpretation suggested by the Save the minigame is that these represent additional victims from a second incident, though even this isn't definitively confirmed by the game's narrative. The ambiguity surrounding the toys' supernatural status adds another layer to their tragic story. The toy animatronics appear in later games, but usually as references or non-canon appearances. Ultimate Custom Night includes Toy Freddy, Toy Bonnie, and Mangle as selectable threats, giving them new mechanics and personality, but UCN is generally understood to be non-canon, William Afton's personal hell, rather than a real location, so these appearances don't tell us about the toy's actual fate. Help Wanted includes toy animatronics in its various minigames, but these are explicitly virtual recreations, part of Fazbear Entertainment's attempt to mock the tragedies as video game fiction. They're not the real toys, but digital avatars, further emphasizing how the actual animatronics are long gone. Security Breach and its DLC include some toy elements as background details, parts and pieces scattered around the Pizzaplex's storage areas, but nothing substantial. The toys are history, relics of an era that ended before most of the Pizzaplex staff were born. They're forgotten within the universe itself, not just by players, their brief existence a footnote in Fazbear Entertainment's long, troubled history. What makes the toys' fate tragic is the waste. These were expensive animatronics, new technology, significant investment in both money and design work. They should have represented a fresh chapter, proof that Fazbear Entertainment could move past its dark history. Instead, they became more evidence of the company's curse, more animatronics caught in the cycle of possession and violence, more machines that turn from entertainment to threat. Their scrapping wasn't just disposal. It was admission of failure, acknowledgement that no amount of new technology or modern design could escape the sins of the past. The toy animatronics are forgotten because they were erased both narratively and literally. Their story was brief, their impact on the larger plot minimal compared to the original animatronics or the revelations about William Afton. They served their purpose as FNAF 2's threats, as explanations for why the company tried again and failed again, and then they were gone. But in that brief existence, they represented something important. The idea that progress is possible, that new beginnings can happen, even if that idea was ultimately proven false. They were hope that failed, potential that was wasted, and their empty heads in a box in Fazbear's Fright are monuments to dreams that died before they could fully form. In a franchise defined by tragedy, the toys' tragedy is one of the quietest, yet it resonates if you take the time to consider what their fate means, not just for them, but for every attempt to build something better on the foundation of unspeakable horror. Throughout Five Nights at Freddy's sprawling narrative, Most attention falls on the animatronics, those metal shells that move and threaten and occasionally speak. But behind those animatronics are humans, people whose lives intersected with Fazbear Entertainment's establishments, often with fatal or at least deeply unfortunate consequences. Some of these humans became major players in the franchise's story. William Afton, Henry Emily, the night guards we play as, the children who were murdered. But others appeared briefly, served a purpose in the moment, and then faded into obscurity, their names forgotten if they were even given names to begin with. Their roles in the larger narrative unclear or completed so thoroughly that they had no reason to return. The most famous of these minor human characters is Phone Guy, whose real name was revealed as Ralph in the 2024 novel Five Nights at Freddy's the week before. For years before this revelation, he was simply known as Phone Guy, the nervous voice on the phone explaining mechanics and providing lore tidbits, while clearly dying inside from the stress of working at these haunted locations. His death on night 4 of FNAF 1 became iconic. The sound of Golden Freddy's groaning moan in the background as Phone Guy's call abruptly cuts to static, confirming what players had suspected, that people really do die at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and Phone Guy just became the latest victim. Despite his prominence in the first 3 games, Phone Guy is often overlooked in lore discussions because he primarily served as a vehicle for exposition rather than an active participant in the plot. His role was to guide players while gradually revealing his own fate, becoming a cautionary tale for night guards who might not take the job seriously enough. Then there's Phone Dude, whom we discussed earlier, but it's worth reiterating his position among forgotten humans. He existed for 2 nights of phone calls and then disappeared from the franchise entirely. His fate after Fazbear's Fright burned down, never addressed. For all we know, he moved on with his life, got a normal job, maybe tells people at parties about that weird week he worked at a horror attraction before it caught fire. Or maybe he died in that fire. And we just don't know because the game didn't care enough to show us. Either way, he's been forgotten, his enthusiastic voice silenced after serving its narrative purpose. Jeremy Fitzgerald, the protagonist of FNAF 2's main nights, is another forgotten soul. We never see him, never hear him speak, only experience his shifts as the new security guard at the reopened Freddy Fazbear's Pizza in 1987. The game ends with Jeremy being moved to the day shift for what Phone Guy describes as a birthday party. And given that the bite of 87 occurred at this location during a party, many in the community have interpreted Jeremy as the victim. However, this connection is never explicitly confirmed in the games. What we know for certain is that Jeremy's role as night guard ends after this final shift, and he disappears from the story entirely. Whether he survived with injuries, died from the incident, or simply moved on with his life after quitting remains unaddressed by the narrative. Fritz Smith, who appears as the night guard for FNAF 2's custom night, is similarly mysterious. He's fired after one night for tampering with the animatronics and for odor, the same reasons Mike Schmidt was fired at the end of FNAF 1. This parallel has led to theories within the community that Fritz might be another alias used by Michael Afton, fitting into a pattern where Michael, could be using different names at different Fazbear locations. However, this remains fan interpretation rather than confirmed lore. If this theory holds, Fritz isn't really a separate character, but another identity worn by someone we already know. If not, Fritz is simply a guy who worked one night, got fired, and was never mentioned again, his story complete in its brevity. The various phone operators from later games rarely get mentioned. In Sister Location, we hear from a different phone voice, a woman whose calls are labelled as baby's voice but are clearly someone else providing guidance. In Pizzeria Simulator, there's Cassette Man, who's eventually revealed to be Henry Emily, but for most of the game, he's just a disembodied voice giving instructions. These characters serve functional purposes, guiding players through gameplay without being characters in their own right, and they're forgotten because they were never meant to be remembered. There are also humans who exist only in lore, referenced but never shown. The employees who died in Springlock failures, their gruesome deaths mentioned in training tapes but never detailed. The birthday party staff who were present during various incidents but never named or characterized. The construction workers who built the pizzerias, the delivery drivers who brought supplies, the accountants and managers who handled Fazbear Entertainment's business side. All these people exist implicitly in the world of FNAF, necessary for the company to function, but they're invisible, background characters who never warranted specific attention. One particularly interesting minor character is the previous night guard mentioned in FNAF 2, the person who worked at the location before Jeremy Fitzgerald was hired. Phone Guy mentions that this previous guard complained about the animatronics trying to get into the office, about Golden Freddy appearing, about all the same threats Jeremy will face. This guard presumably quit or was transferred, replaced by Jeremy. Their story complete with that departure. We never learn their name, never understand why they took the job or what happened to them after leaving. They're a ghost in the story, present only through Phone Guy's references. A reminder that Jeremy isn't the first to suffer these nights. The day shift guard who used the Freddy head before Jeremy, the person whose shift Jeremy is taking over for nighttime, is similarly forgotten. Phone Guy mentions that the day shift guard found the Freddy head trick, figuring out that wearing it would make the animatronics leave them alone, thinking the human in the costume was just another animatronic. This guard's discovery saved their life and inadvertently gave Jeremy the information he'd need to survive. But we never learn who they were, never see any consequence of their experience. They found a solution, passed it on, and disappeared from the narrative. In FNAF 4, the minigames feature several child characters whose identities remain debated. The older brother, wearing a Foxy mask, is generally believed to be Michael Afton. And if true, he's not forgotten, because Michael becomes crucial to later games. But the other bullies, the kids wearing Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica masks, are never identified. They participated in the prank that caused the bite of 83, shoving the crying child's head into Fredbear's mouth, leading to that child's death. These kids probably carry that guilt for the rest of their lives, knowing they killed someone during what was meant to be a birthday joke. But the game doesn't explore that. They appear in the minigames, commit their terrible mistake, and are never mentioned again. The various children seen in minigames throughout the series, kids at birthday parties, children playing in arcades, young patrons of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza having normal experiences before things went wrong, they're all forgotten. Their background, atmosphere, proof that these locations functioned as actual restaurants serving actual families before the murders and hauntings overshadowed everything else. Some of these children might have witnessed incidents, might carry trauma from seeing things they shouldn't have seen. But their stories aren't told because they're not central to FNAF's main plot about William Afton and the murdered children's vengeful spirits. In later games, minor humans continue appearing and being forgotten. Security Breach features several human characters besides Gregory, people who work at the Pizzaplex, or whose voices appear in messages and logs. Most of these people are characterized by short audio files, emails read aloud, or brief visual appearances in background elements. They exist to flesh out the world, to show that the Pizzaplex employs hundreds of people who aren't directly involved in the supernatural horror, but work there anyway. These employees are forgotten because they're intentionally mundane, normal people in an abnormal situation, not important enough to warrant full characterization. One fascinating category of forgotten humans is the management level. Throughout the series, we hear about company decisions, corporate policies, franchise expansions, all requiring executives and managers making choices. Someone approved the design of every animatronic. Someone signed off on the spring-lock suits despite their dangers. Someone decided to reopen locations after tragic incidents. Someone managed the cover-ups, paid settlements to victims' families, crafted press releases that downplayed the horror. These people exist somewhere in the FNAF universe, probably wealthy from the franchise's success, living normal lives while the people who actually worked at the locations suffered and died. But they're invisible, corporate ghosts whose decisions shaped events without their names ever appearing. The forgetting of these minor human characters says something about how FNAF's story is structured. The franchise is ultimately about the animatronics, about possession and supernatural horror manifesting through mechanical performers. Humans, except for the most crucial ones like William and Henry and Michael, serve primarily as victims or witnesses, their individual stories less important than the larger patterns they're caught in. This makes sense narratively, but also means that countless people touched by Fazbear Entertainment's darkness remain unexplored. Their experiences valid but unexamined, their fates resolved or left hanging without the story caring which. There's something humanizing about acknowledging these forgotten people. They remind us that FNAF's world is populated, that behind every incident was someone experiencing it, someone who survived or didn't, someone whose life was altered by working at, or visiting, or simply living near these cursed establishments. Phone Guy's death matters not just because it provides information, but because he was a person, nervous and helpful, who died horribly doing a job he clearly didn't want to do anymore. Jeremy Fitzgerald's potential maiming during the bite of 87 matters because he was someone who survived supernatural horror, only to be attacked during daylight by machines that should have been safe. The previous night guards, the party staff, the children in the background, they all matter as humans even if the narrative has moved past them. In remembering the forgotten human characters of FNAF, we complete our understanding of the franchise's world. We acknowledge that tragedy ripples outward, affecting not just the main players, but everyone in proximity. We recognize that for every Michael Afton with a defined arc and crucial role, there are dozens of Fritz Smiths and Jeremy Fitzgeralds and unnamed employees whose stories ended without ceremony, whose contributions were essential but not celebrated, whose fates we'll never know, because the franchise had bigger mysteries to explore. They're the forgotten, but they're not unimportant, and in this examination, we give them the acknowledgement they deserve, even if it comes years too late and they'll never appear in another game. In the early days of Five Nights at Freddy's, when the first game was new and the community was still forming, when every shadow on a wall or blur in a camera feed seemed like it might hide some deeper secret, an urban legend emerged. Players began whispering about a hidden sixth animatronic, a dog named Sparky, who supposedly appeared in the backstage area if you looked at the right camera at the right time. Screenshots circulated on Tumblr showing a one-armed dog animatronic standing in the doorway, watching the player with the same dead eyes as the other characters. The legend claimed Sparky was peaceful, never attacking, just occasionally appearing as an Easter egg for lucky players to discover. It was exciting, mysterious, exactly the kind of hidden content that would fit perfectly into a game already full of secrets. It was also completely fake. Sparky the dog never existed in Five Nights at Freddy's 1. The screenshots were photoshopped, clever edits that combined Freddy Fazbear's body with parts of Foxy's exposed endoskeleton to create a convincing-looking dog animatronic. The hoax was eventually revealed by its creators, Tumblr users Kodiabear and Nguyen, who admitted to fabricating the whole thing. It was a prank, a test to see if players would believe in content that didn't exist, and it worked spectacularly. For a brief period in the early FNAF community, Sparky the dog was treated as potential hidden content, a shared belief that players accepted because it felt plausible in a game already so full of secrets and mysteries. What makes Sparky fascinating isn't that he was fake, but that he eventually became real, or at least semi-real. In 2021, for the franchise's 7th anniversary, Scott Cawthon released a video titled 7 Years of FNAF's Amazing Fanbase that featured fan art and community creations from over the years. Among these was official artwork of Sparky the dog, acknowledgement from Scott himself that the hoax had become part of FNAF's cultural history, even if it was never part of the actual games. Then, in 2023, the FNAF movie featured a Sparky suit lying in the parts and service room, visible for just a moment but undeniably there. A dog animatronic with the name Sparky on its collar. Additionally, a location in the movie is called Sparky's, a diner separate from Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, with menu items referencing the character. Scott had taken a fake fan creation and canonized it, bringing Sparky from hoax to reality in a roundabout way. The joke continued in Secret of the Mimic, the 2025 game that featured Bub, a dog-themed animatronic suit very similar to the original Sparky concept. While not explicitly called Sparky, the parallel was clear. Another nod to the urban legend that wouldn't die. Sparky has become a symbol of FNAF's relationship with its community, a reminder that sometimes fan creations become so embedded in the franchise's culture that they might as well be official. He's the forgotten character who was never real, but is now somehow part of the story anyway, existing in that liminal space between hoax and canon. Other urban legends and hoaxes populated FNAF's early days, though none achieved Sparky's lasting impact. Shadow Bonnie himself started as a hoax before being confirmed real. Early screenshots of the dark figure dismissed as edited images until enough players encountered him to prove he existed. The idea of a Shadow Freddy in FNAF 1, separate from the actual Shadow Freddy that appears in later games, circulated briefly, with players reporting a dark Freddy figure appearing in certain conditions. These sightings were never verified, likely misidentifications of Golden Freddy, or just wishful thinking, but they contributed to the sense that FNAF was full of secrets, that anything might be possible. The myth of the Purple Freddy, an animatronic that supposedly appeared after completing specific challenges, was another early hoax. Players claimed that beating certain night configurations would unlock a purple variant of Freddy Fazbear, distinct from Shadow Freddy, with unique behaviors. This was false, but the persistence of the rumor showed how hungry the community was for new content, for hidden challenges and secret rewards. FNAF's design encouraged this, with legitimate Easter eggs like Golden Freddy, proving that rare, hard-to-find content did exist in the games, making every rumor seem potentially valid. Cut content represents another category of forgotten elements. Characters and features that were planned, partially implemented, or fully developed, but never made it into the final games. We know from interviews and file data mining that various animatronics underwent design changes during development. FNAF 1 originally considered a beaver as the main antagonist, inspired by criticisms of Scott Cawthon's previous game Chipper and Sons Lumbercoma, where reviewers said the characters looked like scary animatronics. Scott leaned into that fear with FNAF, but the beaver didn't make it past early concepts. Freddy Fazbear replaced him, and the beaver was forgotten, existing only in behind-the-scenes anecdotes about the game's development. Sister Locations files contain unused models and textures for characters that never appeared in the final game. Funtime Freddy and Funtime Foxy both had alternate color schemes during development, with Funtime Foxy originally sporting purple colors instead of the pink and white of the final design. These beta versions exist in the game's code, but weren't used, suggesting last-minute changes to the animatronics' appearances. Why the changes were made is unclear, possibly to better differentiate characters or to match merchandising plans, but the result is that early versions of these animatronics are forgotten, known only to data miners and development historians. Help Wanted contains extensive unused content. The files include blacklight variants of several animatronics, designs based on Funko's special merchandise line, that were textured and modeled but never implemented in the game. Only partial assets remain: Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and an untextured Foxy, suggesting these were scrapped relatively late in development. The reason for their removal isn't documented, but players never got to face neon-colored versions of the classic animatronics in VR, and these blacklight variants are now just curiosities in the game's code. The Curse of Dreadbear DLC for Help Wanted includes unused textures for burnt Freddles, apparently intended for a hard mode of the Build-A-Mangle level that was never added. The texture shows the small Freddle creatures with scorched, damaged appearances similar to the Phantom animatronics from FNAF 3, but the level they were supposed to appear in doesn't exist in the released DLC. They're forgotten content from a game that was released, visible in files but never experienced by players. Security Breach famously had massive amounts of cut content, entire gameplay systems and story sections that were removed before or shortly after release. Original plans for the game included more elaborate mechanics, different endings, alternate paths through the story that weren't in the final product. Some of this was added back through DLC and updates, but other elements remain cut, existing only in beta footage, unused voice lines, and data mined assets. The scope of what was removed makes it hard to even catalog what's missing, let alone remember specific forgotten features. There are also characters implied to exist but never shown. Chica's Party World, mentioned in Sister Location's source code and later confirmed as a real location in Secret of the Mimic, suggests there was an entire restaurant chain parallel to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, centered around Chica before she became part of Freddy's band. But we never visit this location, never meet its other animatronics if there were any, never learn its full history. It exists as a footnote, a piece of world building that hints at a larger universe without exploring it. The novels and Fazbear Fright stories introduce characters that never appear in the games, These aren't forgotten in the usual sense, since they're canon to the book continuity, but they're forgotten by game-focused fans who don't engage with the novels. Characters like Jessica, Carlton, Marla, and Lamar from the original novel trilogy have complete arcs and rich characterization, but are unknown to people who only play the games. Similarly, the Fazbear Fright stories feature dozens of unique characters and animatronics, each with their own horror scenarios that exist parallel to the games without crossing over. The distinction between what's canon and what's not has blurred over time, with Scott Cawthon confirming that the books exist in separate continuities, but can be used to solve game mysteries by examining their parallels. This means that book-exclusive characters might be forgotten by game fans, even though they're relevant to understanding the franchise's lore. It's a unique type of forgetting, where characters exist and are fully developed, but are overlooked by large portions of the fan base because they appear in a different medium. Unused mechanics and features also fall into this category of forgotten content. Security Breach was supposed to include a sanity system, visible in beta footage, where Gregory's mental state would deteriorate if he witnessed traumatic events or stayed in dangerous areas too long. This was cut, and most players don't know it was ever planned. Similarly, early plans for FNAF 3 included multiple animatronics that could kill you, not just Springtrap, but this was changed to make the game more focused. The Phantoms exist as remnants of this earlier design, threats that were downgraded from lethal to inconvenient. The forgotten characters and content of FNAF, both real and imagined, tell a story about the franchise's development and community. They show how myths can form around games, how urban legends emerge from players' desire to discover more than what's officially there. They reveal that development is a process of addition and subtraction, with features and characters being created and then removed based on design needs, time constraints, or creative vision. And they demonstrate that in a franchise this large, with this many games and books and supplementary materials, some things will inevitably be left behind. Not because they're unimportant, but because there's simply too much to remember everything. Sparky's journey from hoax to canon symbol is perhaps the most fitting tribute to these forgotten elements. He began as something that didn't exist, a shared hallucination created by fans and spread through the community. Over time, he became real through sheer cultural persistence, acknowledged by the creator, and eventually incorporated into official content. In a series built on mysteries and hidden truths, about characters trapped between life and death, Sparky exists between real and fake, forgotten and remembered, hoax and canon. He's proof that in FNAF, even things that were never there can become part of the story if enough people believe in them, if the legend grows strong enough to manifest reality. And that's a kind of possession of its own. Fan passion, bringing characters to life despite never being programmed into the code. Urban legends achieving a sort of existence by refusing to be forgotten. In the end, Sparky is more real than many actual characters, because he represents something larger than himself, the community's creative power and the franchise's willingness to embrace even its myths as part of its evolving mythology. As we reach the end of our journey through Five Nights at Freddy's Forgotten Corners, as the camera feeds grow dim and the last echoes of animatronic footsteps fade into static, it's worth reflecting on what these overlooked characters tell us about the franchise as a whole. Every figure we've examined tonight, from Phone Dude's enthusiastic obliviousness to the shadow animatronic's mysterious presence, from the mediocre Melody's budget performances to JJ's silent appearances beneath your desk, from the Phantom's burnt manifestations to the toy animatronics' tragic scrapping, from minor human characters lost in the shuffle to urban legends that became somehow real, all of them contribute something essential to FNAF's identity. They prove that the franchise is more than just its main story, more than William Afton and his crimes, more than the puppet and the missing children. It's a rich, layered universe where even the smallest details have thought behind them, where even characters who appear once or not at all add to the atmosphere and depth. The forgotten characters are victims of circumstance, overshadowed by bigger revelations or introduced at moments when the community was focused elsewhere. Phone Dude arrived in FNAF 3, a game that revolutionized the franchise's lore with its minigames and good ending, so his cheerful presence couldn't compete with revelations about William Afton's fate. The shadow animatronics appeared so rarely that most players never encountered them. Their mystery too subtle for a fan base hungry for concrete answers. The mediocre melodies were budget options in a game focused on burning everything down, literally and figuratively. JJ was too easy to miss, too passive to make an impression. The Phantoms were hallucinations in a game with one real threat, mechanisms rather than characters. The toy animatronics were scrapped before they could leave a lasting mark. Minor humans were background to the animatronics' horror. And urban legends like Sparky existed outside the games entirely, at least until they didn't. Yet each of these forgotten figures represents a facet of what makes FNAF compelling. Phone Dude shows us how newcomers perceive the franchise's horror, with excitement rather than fear, highlighting the distance between those who lived through the tragedies and those who only know them as stories. The shadows embody ambiguity, the refusal to explain everything, trusting that mystery itself can be satisfying. The mediocre melodies provide comic relief and world building, showing that not everything in this universe is tragic or terrifying. JJ demonstrates that Easter eggs don't need elaborate explanations to be valuable, that sometimes a moment of, "What was that?" is enough. The Phantoms prove that psychological horror, threats that don't kill you but make your situation harder, can be just as effective as jump scare animatronics. The toy animatronic scrapping reminds us that not every story ends with resolution, that some characters exist briefly and then are gone, their potential unfulfilled, but their impact real. Minor human characters ground the franchise in humanity, ensuring we never forget that behind the possessed robots and supernatural horror are people whose lives were destroyed. And urban legends like Sparky show that FNAF belongs as much to its community as to its creator, that fans' passion and creativity can shape the franchise's direction through sheer cultural force. In writing about these forgotten characters, in spending this time examining what's been overlooked, we're doing more than just cataloguing trivia. We're asserting that completeness matters, that understanding FNAF fully means understanding even its margins, that the characters who didn't become merchandise or wiki darlings still deserve acknowledgement. We're also resisting the tendency in modern fandoms to focus only on what's currently relevant, what's trending, what's being actively discussed. The forgotten characters remind us that depth takes time to appreciate, that not everything needs to be immediately important to have value. There's also something deeply FNAF about forgotten characters. This is a franchise about memory, about past horrors that refuse to stay buried, about spirits that linger because they haven't been properly acknowledged. The animatronics themselves are forgotten children, their murders covered up, their deaths unresolved, their stories lost until the puppet gave them new forms and purpose. In that light, forgotten characters like Phone Dude or the mediocre Melodies or JJ are thematically appropriate. Minor ghosts haunting the franchise's periphery, waiting for someone to remember them. The future of these forgotten characters is uncertain. Some might resurface in later games or supplementary materials, given new relevance by story developments that connect to their brief appearances. FNAF has done this before, taking seemingly minor details from early games and revealing them as crucial to understanding later plots. It's possible that JJ will turn out to be important, that the shadows will get a full explanation, that Phone Dude's fate will be addressed. But it's also possible, perhaps more likely, that they'll remain forgotten, their stories complete as they are, their roles fulfilled. And maybe that's okay. Not every character needs to be central to the plot. Not every mystery needs to be solved. Part of what makes FNAF's world feel real is that it includes elements that exist without elaborate justification. Background details that suggest depth without demanding explanation. The mediocre Melodies don't need a tragic backstory to justify their existence. They're budget animatronics for second-tier locations, and that's sufficient. JJ doesn't need to be revealed as crucial to the timeline. She can just be an Easter egg, a moment of curiosity that leads nowhere in particular. Some things can be small, can be forgotten, can serve their purpose, and then fade away. But tonight, for this exploration, we've brought them back. We've examined them with the same care and attention usually reserved for the franchise's major players. We've considered their designs, their mechanics, their potential significance, their ultimate irrelevance. We've acknowledged that they existed, that they were created with intention, even if that intention was minor, that they added something to FNAF, even if that something wasn't essential. We've remembered the forgotten, and in doing so, we've completed a picture that's usually left partial. If you take anything from this journey through FNAF's overlooked corners, let it be appreciation for depth. Let it be recognition that franchises are built not just from their headlining content, but from accumulated details, from minor characters and small moments that collectively create texture and richness. Let it be awareness that forgetting is natural, inevitable even, in franchises this large. But that remembered or not, these characters mattered when they appeared, contributed to experiences that players enjoyed or were terrified by, and deserve acknowledgement for their roles, however brief. The forgotten characters of Five Nights at Freddy's aren't asking to be resurrected. They're not demanding sequels or spin-offs or deep lore explanations. They're simply there, in the game files and wikis and old Reddit threads, waiting patiently in case someone decides to look back, to explore what came before, to appreciate the full scope of what this franchise has become. Tonight, we looked back, we explored, we appreciated, and in doing so, we proved that nothing in FNAF is truly forgotten, not permanently. There's always someone willing to dig through old games, to examine background details, to remember what others have moved past. So before you drift off, before sleep claims you and this journey through forgotten corridors ends, take a moment to appreciate the characters we've examined tonight. Think of Phone Dude's enthusiasm, RWQFSFASXC's impossible name, Mr. Hippo's rambling stories, JJ's silent watch, the Phantom's burnt warnings, the toy animatronics' hollow heads, Ralph's nervous guidance, and Sparky's journey from hoax to half-reality. They're all part of this franchise you love, all pieces of the puzzle even if they don't fit obviously into the final picture. They're forgotten, but not gone. Overlooked, but not erased. And now, after this examination, perhaps a little less forgotten than before. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of Five Nights at Freddy's most overlooked elements. If you enjoyed this journey through the forgotten corners of the franchise, feel free to like and subscribe. And remember, in a series built on hidden secrets and buried truths, nothing stays forgotten forever. Sometimes it just takes someone willing to look in the right places, to ask the right questions, to shine light on the shadows everyone else has passed by. Until next time, may your nights be peaceful, your animatronics powered down, and your memories of even the smallest characters preserved against the passage of time. Sleep well, and don't forget to check under your desk. You never know what might be watching from the shadows, waiting patiently to be remembered.